Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, July 20th, 2021. That's a lot of 20s again, okay. Wasn't really thinking about how that would affect things this morning. Hey, what about launching ourselves into space? That's a possibility. I hadn't been thinking about either. In fact, Bill tweets this morning that the Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now and asks, did I, David Waldman, Kagro X, if you want to reach me on Twitter, successfully stick himself to the side of Jeff Bezos' spacecraft with Gorilla Glue. It was my intention, but they were out of Gorilla Glue at the store, so we're just going with whatever they happen to have, a little bit of bubble gum and Scotch tape. Let's find out. It's the cheapest way into space, as far as I can figure out. This tweet, of course, sponsored by Gorilla Glue, the fantastic super glue so popular that they were out of it at the store. You see, recommended number one by glue huffing gorillas, he says. This is true. You can view it all on the Gorilla Channel, left behind at the White House by Donald Trump. I know that story was invented as a joke, but I still believe he tried to make it come true after the fact. I heard about this Gorilla Channel, and I heard they were kidding, but couldn't we put something like that together? That, I believe, really may have happened. All right. Well, let's see. Yes, Jeff Bezos taking his brother, apparently, among others, up into space, or maybe sort of kind of space with him. I don't know what's happening. In the last week or two, the two billionaires two of the three billionaires, I think, who've been aiming to send themselves or their own companies into space, I don't know, maybe not the whole company, but that would be a great idea, have two of the three involved in this, I guess, space race between three people that, I guess it doesn't really matter which one goes to space first, have launched their vehicles only to, I don't know, I guess reveal to us at the last minute, if you haven't been watching closely, that they're not really exactly going all the way to space, or it's suborbital or something. Or last week, or whatever it was, just before Richard Branson and Virgin Galactic, I think he calls it, made their launch, I got wind of the fact that the two of them were going into space. I was only paying attention to Bezos. I wasn't really even paying attention to that. I had only seen that. And then there was this announcement that that Branson was going to go, and I thought, well, that's kind of funny. He's like, did he leapfrog him and say, well, I'm almost ready to go. Let's go with our launch and beat Jeff Bezos into space, even though, one, I don't know what that would do for anybody, and two, that sounds great, though, to beat Jeff Bezos into space. That sounds like an awesome idea. So he leapfrogged him, and then, like the day of the launch, they said, well, he's going near space, or kind of almost into space, but not really necessarily into space. But don't worry, next week, Jeff Bezos, he's going, and he's definitely going into space. And now, this morning, I see people talking about, well, maybe his flight is suborbital too, and I don't know whether it really matters. I don't have a space rocket, so I guess that's great and all. And I think also probably pretty natural to see that people are sort of complaining about it, like, why we bother doing it? The planet is falling apart. We have a pandemic. There's a million other problems. Yeah, all true. I've never seen that change a billionaire's mind about what they actually, spend their money on, but all valid. And I think he actually has acknowledged as much too, but what does he care? Because, whatever. Let's see. As a matter of fact, I did see somebody tweeting this morning and had to send the tweet out into the wider world because I thought it was a pretty good observation. The only one we really need to make about the events of the week in terms of billionaires launching themselves into space. Really amazed, says Max Kennerly, really amazed by the forces unleashed by trickle-down economics, deregulation, and low taxes on the super rich. 50 years ago, Americans couldn't even imagine traveling to space. Well, of course, we were doing that naturally, but of course, it was a national event and a national effort as well. I guess there's a lot you could read into this, of course, but I think well put and makes you think about a lot of things. 50 years ago, of course, no one would have believed that any one individual could say, well, to hell with it. I'm going to go to space too. I'll just build my own space company and, I'll go for a little while to space with no payoff necessarily coming later. I guess Richard Branson's eventual payoff is, I'll take tourists into space. I don't know what Jeff Bezos is thinking. Maybe he also would. Elon Musk and SpaceX at least have, there's a commercial idea of a commercial venture behind it that they would, launch rockets to resupply the space station, or perhaps there's really nothing else that they could launch satellites or. Okay, so that's two things that you can do, launching things into space. And we're doing both of them. We've cornered the market on stuff you can do in space. I mean, it's not much of a market, but whatever. Anyway, very interesting, fun to watch, etc. Also fun to watch people observing that the Blue Origin, that's the name of the company that Jeff Bezos created to pretend that he was doing something, important at a corporate level. But apparently the rocket, a little phallic looking, maybe. People are observing. It's very interesting. I don't know if there's any way around it with rockets, but they didn't go out of their way when it came to designing the space capsule to say, well, let's look more traditionally rocket-ish versus let's look more traditionally giant penis-ish. But, whatever. I guess it's built for comfort. If you're a billionaire and you're building your own thing and you can call all the shots, maybe he wanted a massage chair in there for everybody. No idea how that, but this rounded space capsule thing, it's certainly distinctive at any rate. All right. So there you have it. People are going into space. Whoop-de-doo. And I'm glad they're doing it and something. Other than that, let's see. Progress, I guess, of sorts being made on launching the other thing that we have to launch, the January 6th commission. No, not commission, but committee. The select committee in the House begins its work. I believe their first hearing is actually sometime next week. But the Republicans have gone ahead and named at least 5 members. I don't know how many they're entitled to. But the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, put out a list of 5 Republican members that he intends to name to the committee. And in the ordinary course of things, the Democrats ordinarily will accept whoever it is that the Republicans want to be on the committee in their shoes on the committee. And sure enough, 4 of the people I don't know anything about because they're, lesser known weirdos who are going to ruin everything. And then the 5th one selected by McCarthy was, you'll never guess. You already heard the news, but you didn't have to hear the news to be able to guess. It's Jim Jordan. And I was wondering, I knew that he was going to do that. Although I am a little bit surprised, for instance, that he didn't attempt to put Marjorie Taylor Greene on it. She's been banned from her committee assignments, or, well, rather, I guess technically stripped of the committee assignments that she had earlier gotten. And I don't think that Democrats would have agreed to allow through a resolution that included her, because it was their intention to prevent her from serving on any committees, serious or otherwise. But I guess technically all they really did was strip her of the committees she had been on, so I guess she remains technically eligible for this one, but it would be up to the Democrats to provide the votes to pass the resolution through the House. I don't know that they'll accept Jim Jordan, but I think they've gotten used to the idea. There were other crazy people that he could have put on there. I'm surprised that there were definitely people that were too hot to handle, too poisonous, too toxic, as they say. He didn't feel comfortable making it Matt Gaetz and Paul Gosar and Louis Gohmert and maybe a few others. But it is interesting that he went with Jim Jordan again. And I was just sort of wondering what other Republicans think of that. I assume most of them actually think great because he's such a champion and fights so hard and yada yada. But I was wondering whether it pissed any Republicans off that, I mean, clearly Kevin McCarthy thinks the vast majority of the House Republican conference is useless. I mean, every time there's a high-profile hearing going on, if Jim Jordan isn't already on that committee, Kevin McCarthy names him to that committee because I guess he's the only guy that Kevin McCarthy knows of who, I don't know, can even make an incoherent case for the Republican position on these things. If they are having Benghazi hearings, he's going to put Jim Jordan on the committee. If they're having an impeachment, well, then we'll move him to Judiciary. If we're going to have this happen in the Intelligence Committee, well, then I'll move him to the Intelligence Committee. If we're going to have a special committee to investigate the insurrection, I'll move him to that committee. And, you know, I mean, I guess it's great for Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan can go home to his district and say, I'm so trusted by the leadership, they put me everywhere. But I'm just curious, you know, what other Republicans who might have been interested in conducting the same type of sabotage on behalf of the Republican Party, what they think about how come I don't get a chance? Why does Jim Jordan get the opportunity to ruin everything? I want to ruin something. I'm just kind of curious about whether or not they really think that, you know, they should have a chance to do that, or whether they're perfectly pleased to let Jim Jordan do the stupid stuff. I don't know. One day we'll look into it and see what we can find out. All right, let's see. It being Tuesday, Jim Jordan, not the only one that we're expecting to hear from later today. Joan McCarter, who has nothing to do with Jim Jordan, and I'm sure doesn't even really want to be in the same sentence with him, will be due on the show. We're never going to have Jim Jordan on the show, but Joan McCarter, yes. I would say it's all lined up, but you know, whatever. Of course it is. And we'll learn to just trust it at this point and say, Joan remembers it's Tuesday, so do I. If I do, she does. And that's that. All right. Other things to catch up on before we, I don't know. Let's just go to 10:30 at this point. Actually, I'm kind of anxious to talk to Joan because there's plenty going on. It's Infrastructure Week again for the 89th time. This week includes at least the threat of a vote in the Senate tomorrow. So we'll catch up on what that vote is all about. I've been watching the Republicans, and in particular Mitch McConnell, squirm and cry and say that it's too early to have a vote, or that the vote imposes an artificial deadline of some kind. There's all sorts of, it's very interesting, like, you know, semi-nuanced, half-truth arguments about what's going on here. I mean, I think we had it right. The only vote that there really could be at this point would be a motion to proceed to consideration of a budget resolution that, in turn, would authorize reconciliation bills to be considered later on. And the Republican take on this is, well, we're not done negotiating. Of course, you know, are they really negotiating at all? No one can really tell. But they want to do everything they can to prevent reconciliation from going forward. Reconciliation can't happen until there's a budget resolution. The bipartisan, or what do they call it, bilateral infrastructure framework, BIF, can go forward without a budget resolution in place. So they're looking to block reconciliation by saying there can't be a budget resolution yet because we haven't finished negotiating over, I don't know what. I'm not even sure. This is interesting, right? I think they're saying, this didn't really occur to me until just now, but I think the Republicans are saying, we haven't finished negotiating the bipartisan bill that we're going to bring to the floor under regular order. Therefore, we protest your bringing a budget resolution to the floor, which will enable you to later bring a reconciliation bill to the floor, which isn't the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but is a totally different one. But remember that the reconciliation bill is the one that Republicans were very, very angry, incensed, and how dare you connect the two bills in any way, shape, or form and make a linkage between them. Please don't do that. You can't do that. That's not fair. Now, you can do anything you want, of course, and you can link anything you want to in your mind, and it was already done. But then everybody said, oh, yeah, whatever it takes to get you to go along with it. Yeah, sure, they're not connected. And then Republicans turn around and connect the two. You can't bring this budget bill to the floor because that means reconciliation can come to the floor. Yes. Well, but we're not done negotiating this other separate bill that is totally unconnected. But somehow you can't bring this one to the floor because we're not done with that other one, even though I asked you not to connect them. Connect them for these purposes, please. Huh? All right, that doesn't make any sense, but I guess we see where you're going with this one. So, anyway, Mitch McConnell's excuse for the last day or two has been, well, if you haven't finished negotiating, and I think he may even be trying to say, well, we're still trying to negotiate what's going to be in the budget resolution. You're really not, because the budget resolution passes the same way that reconciliation passes. There's no filibuster permitted on a budget resolution. But anyway, he says, we haven't finished negotiating. How can you bring a bill to the floor? How can you, get underway on debate for a bill if you don't know what's in the bill yet? And it's one of those things that makes a slight amount of common sense to people who don't necessarily know anything about the procedure and how these things work. To say, well, how can you have a vote on the bill when you don't even know what's in it? That's true, but of course, the vote is not on the bill, is it? It's a vote a vote on a motion to proceed to debate on the bill. Well, how can you debate the bill if you don't know what's in it? I don't know. Well, first of all, you could say, how have you done it in all the, dozen or so times that you've brought a bill to the floor that hasn't finished negotiating, but you had a vote on a motion to proceed for? Well, okay, there's a hypocrisy angle. And then there's also, but there's an equally effective common sense sort of kind of angle to saying, well, this is a vote to start debate about the bill. Don't you think we ought to have a little debate about the bill so that we can decide what's going to be in it? I don't see any reason why not. Well, that's crazy. Oh, is it really? I mean, when you debate things under regular order and bring amendments to the floor, isn't that a debate about what's going to go in the bill? And how could you have started that debate? How could there ever be debate on an amendment ever if the rule is you can't start debating on a bill until you know exactly what's going to be in it? There's debate about adding things and taking things out of bills all the time while they're live. So, whatever. I mean, no one really is interested in this debate. So no one's really paying attention to the fact that, this talking point is actually easily swatted aside. So, a big whoop. But you and I will know, and that's an important part of why we do the show. And I don't know. I guess now you'll be able to walk around and tell nobody about how things really work. So, at any rate, tomorrow, I guess, still threatened a vote on a motion to proceed to, I guess, consideration of the budget bill. That would, a motion to proceed is subject to a filibuster. This, I think, despite the fact that the underlying bill would not be subject to a filibuster. I don't know if there's any special rule for motion to proceed to consideration of a budget bill, though. I mean, there should be if the bill isn't subject to filibuster. Whatever. At any rate, there you go. And then there would, of course, be the possibility of filibustering during the consideration of the motion to proceed, I guess, itself. And then you'd have to have a cloture vote on that motion to proceed. Maybe, I don't know. Well, we'll look up those rules when we get to it, or maybe even discuss it with Joan later on. In other news, for the moment, Twitter might still be Marjorie Trader Greene free. She is under an oppressive 12-hour Twitter suspension for COVID-19 misinformation. You may have seen what she was tweeting yesterday. You may have seen what she has tweeted any day, any time, and thought, boy, she should be banned from Twitter for that. And indeed, you would be right. This is one of the few times where Twitter actually agrees. 12-hour Twitter suspension, which is probably nearly over COVID-19 misinformation. I think, by the way, when they ban you for 12 hours, the ban should be during the daylight hours, the working day hours where you live, where you are currently for whatever reason. She may have been banned overnight, which would be, of course, no obstacle for her. But at any rate, she was banned. What did she do? She said that, or as the Hill report, she baselessly claimed, and that's true, that COVID-19 is, quote, not dangerous for people who are not obese or under the age of 65. But of course, it is. And I guess that was enough for them. And whatever, blah, 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 12-hour suspension, probably almost over, but it's nice to see her get, even a slap on the wrist every once in a while. So that's good. Congratulations to Twitter for doing that. And I would like to know when Twitter is going to build a rocket ship and go into outer space, or at least the CEO of Twitter. And I guess that's probably only around the corner. In other pandemic news, there is, let's see, the New York Times has two interesting things going on. One, I guess, goes to the question of, is there anybody that can convince reluctant vaccine holdouts to, get in line and get a shot, or not even get in line now, just drive right up and get a shot? Or I guess alternatively, is there anybody who's got a reputation good enough with the right crowds that they will be believed and not be reviled for advocating for the vaccine? And I guess the answer is just still no. Opinion piece in the New York Times under the headline, Dolly Parton tried, but Tennessee is squandering a miracle. Good point. Well made here. We haven't discussed, I don't think, to any great extent, the financing that Dolly Parton put behind the development of the vaccine through funding of research. I mean, I think everybody's probably vaguely, at least, aware of the fact that she did that, and it was really remarkable. And it's quite in keeping with the way she handles her philanthropy. She's just apparently that kind of person, makes people every once in a while observe that she's some sort of national treasure, and I think that's probably, the whatever, her PR account is a national treasure. I assume that there's something genuine behind it as well, because they've done a great job with the PR, and I believe it. And no skin off my nose, really, honestly, if Dolly Parton turns out not to be everything she's cracked up to be, so it's an easy call. But she put apparently quite a bit of money behind this vaccine research. Let's get the more organized thoughts of Margaret Rankel, contributing opinion writer in the New York Times, described here as a contributing opinion writer who covers flora, fauna, politics, and culture in the American South. I don't know how we're supposed to take that, but there it is. And this is actually datelined a couple of days ago, but just published yesterday. Datelined Nashville, because Tennessee. When Dolly Parton received her first dose of the Moderna vaccine at Vanderbilt University, where her $1 million donation helped to fund the research, she sang an updated version of her iconic song, Jolene. The tongue-in-cheek lyrics, tongue-in-cheek, just one cheek that the tongue was in at that point. The lyrics were meant to inspire people to get vaccinated. Do you care what the lyrics were? You can sing it yourself. Vaccine, vaccine. All right, instead of Jolene, right? I'm begging of you, please don't hesitate. Vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. I can't do the singing for you. Because once you're dead, then that's a bit too late. Wow. Well, that tongue is way in that cheek. She gave it a good try, a heroic try, but somehow the bonehead politicians running this state, Tennessee, managed to overcome even the goodwill generated by its favorite daughter. Remember how hopeful we were when the new COVID-19 vaccines arrived so astonishingly quickly and were so astonishingly effective and safe? As a nation, politically, institutionally, too often personally, we've botched almost everything about this pandemic, and we did not deserve a miracle. The miracle arrived anyway. We were giddy about the prospect of those vaccines. We could not stop talking about how happy we would be to sit in a movie theater again, to hear live music again, to go to church and sing out loud again, and sit and talk around a table again, late into the night, with no care for how long we had been breathing the same air. All very true. Soaring rhetoric, but there's some truth to it. We would reach for new babies and lean down to smell their downy heads. Ah, that's cute. We would weep with the joy of being skin to skin with new life after such a long, dark year. The anticipation of happiness seemed truly ecumenical. Liberals, conservatives, politically indifferent people, all the people I knew were watching for their vaccine priority number to come up. We were signing up, rather. We were singing as well for leftover doses that might be available at the end of the day. Remember that? That's true. It seems to be gone. We were heading out of town to get vaccinated in rural counties where health officials were moving more quickly through the vaccine priority rankings. The lack of vaccine lines should have told us something was happening in those counties. It did. Something besides the fact that fewer people lived there. Well, it did tell us that as well. Tennessee's governor, Bill Lee, not Billy, but Bill Lee, understood what was going on. Mr. Lee is vaccinated, but he refused to be photographed getting the shot, the COVID shot, that is. He did post a photo of himself getting a flu shot last November. Apparently, that was good enough for him to do, but not the COVID shot for some reason. We'll continue with this and a little bit more COVID news after a brief break. Have a sip of water. You do the same. Let's all drink. What do you say?
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. More about craziness in Tennessee and what happened with the big Dolly Parton push. We left off just by noting that the governor of Tennessee would not publish a photo of himself getting the COVID shot, though he did post a photo of himself getting a flu shot last November, along with the message, "Getting a flu shot is more important than ever this year." His Twitter post read, "I got mine to help protect my granddaughters as we prepare to celebrate their first birthday." Not a word about protecting children from the deadliest pandemic in 100 years. None of this was surprising. Mr. Lee is not a leader who actually leads, so much as a politician who reads the room. From the beginning, white people in rural Tennessee have been so skeptical of this vaccine that last month state officials returned an allotment of 3 million doses to the federal stockpile. We're sort of grinding to a halt. The state's health commissioner, Dr. Lisa Piercy, told News Channel 5 in Nashville, "The people who want it have gotten it." The trouble is that not enough people want it, particularly here in the South, which accounts for 8 of the 10 states with the lowest vaccination rates, and infections have begun to climb. The rate of daily coronavirus infections in Tennessee has more than tripled in the past 3 weeks, one of the largest increases in the entire nation, as the virus shows signs of renewed spread, wrote the Tennessean's, ready, indefatigable health reporter Brett Kellman last week. The indefatigable health reporter. Got it. I've gotten that one backwards before. The state's average test positivity rate. We haven't even really talked about that in a year. And count of active infections, which Greg mentioned yesterday and which I forgot to chime in and interrupt him and say, that has never been a good statistic. No two states appear to report active infections in the same way. Apparently there's just no standardization for that. I mean, I think it would be pretty easy to define, but there are definitely some states that have made no effort whatsoever to figure out what that number is. And I actually think it's a relatively good thing. I think the states that have been most serious about taking on the pandemic and making sure that people get vaccinated and get health care when they do get COVID have been the least careful, the least conscientious about reporting accurate active case numbers. They're much more interested in reporting accurate new case numbers and vaccination numbers or positive test numbers. But they're not paying any attention to. Once people get it, they're like, well, now it's up to the medical system to treat them. We're more interested in trying to prevent people from getting it. Once they get it, we're just going to count them, and that's that. There's a number of states where the active case list, I think I've described this before, the active case numbers are pretty clearly just, I don't think it's a statistic, for one thing, and I don't think all states actually prepare those statistics. What it really is I don't think that there are very many states that track recovered cases accurately. They simply say, if you got it, you got it, and then we hope you find your way out of it. We'll report if you die, but other than that, no. If you still have it, you're as important to us as people who don't, just so long as you don't die, if we don't have to put you down as a death statistic. So there's a lot of states, the highest states in raw numbers or per capita numbers of on the Worldometers charts anyway, where I think they just figure out active cases by taking your number of reported positive cases and subtracting your reported number of recoveries. If you're not reporting your recoveries, there are states out there that apparently the numbers would tell you that 98% of all the people who have ever gotten COVID in the full year and a half we've been dealing with it, and in some of these states, have still got it. And of course, there's long haul COVID, and maybe they still do have it. But I don't know if you could say they're still suffering from it, in all cases. It's just painfully obvious that some states are really conscientious about trying to keep those numbers down so that they look like they're, recovering from things. And other states just say, I'm just interested in making sure more people don't get it and that people get vaccinated. Anyway, where do we leave off here? Right, the Tennessee average test positivity rate, something we haven't talked about in a long time, plus active infections, sharply climbed in the same period. I have continued to track active cases. At this point, when I do my nightly reports, I only do active cases once a week, just to see which states are and aren't paying attention to keeping that statistic in shape. But also it tells me a little something about what else is going on in the state. In states, I can recognize now which states are and aren't keeping track of that stat in the, what's become the traditional understanding of that stat in the way that's calculated. And given that, I can tell a little bit more about what the rate of increase in new infections is, even though, you can measure that directly as well. But this is just a second look at the same statistic in most cases. Conservative Tennessee legislators responded, it's true, but not by working to reduce vaccine hesitancy. Instead, they pressured state health officials to cancel vaccination events aimed at teenagers and to retract social media posts urging adolescents to get vaccinated. Worse, these anti-vaccination efforts weren't limited to the COVID-19 vaccine. Conservative lawmakers also urged the Tennessee Department of Health to halt outreach efforts designed to inform teenagers about all vaccines. You remember that being announced last week. Worse still, they arranged the firing of Dr. Michelle Fiscus as medical director of the Vaccine Preventable Diseases and Immunization Program at the Department of Health. Dr. Fiscus was the state's top vaccine authority. It was, you'll remember the quote, "my job to provide evidence-based education and vaccine access so that Tennesseans could protect themselves against COVID-19. I have been terminated for doing my job because some of our politicians have bought into the anti-vaccine misinformation campaign rather than taking the time to speak with the medical experts. The politicization of public discourse around immunization is not unique to Tennessee. The question isn't why Tennessee is so out of step with science. The question is why politics has anything to do with health policy at all." Well, that's a bigger question. The planet is growing more crowded, bringing people into closer contact with diverse animal and human populations. At the same time, the health risks associated with climate change are ratcheting upwards, but just as protection against communicable diseases becomes increasingly urgent, conservative media outlets are sowing doubt and delusion in the Republican base, and feckless elected officials are following suit. Like Mr. Lee, his licked finger held aloft in the wind of rural white discontent, other Republican leaders in the South take their life-saving vaccines in private and give lip service to perverse notions of freedom, not in scare quotes, in their public statements. Campaign funding from the national oligarchs is what sets legislative agendas across the red states, so I can understand why these penny ante politicians are working so hard to limit tax-funded safety nets. I can even understand why they're so hell-bent on killing public education. It clearly benefits the wealthy for taxes to be low or non-existent and for poor people to be incurious and compliant. But how can it possibly benefit the oligarchs to risk the lives of the very people who keep electing their toadies to state houses in the first place? I just don't get it. "I'm afraid for my state," Dr. Fiscus wrote. "I'm afraid for my state, too. More than that, I'm afraid for my country. Tech companies won't stop the spread of misinformation about vaccines, and conservative leaders can't muster the political will to combat that misinformation with science." I'm not saying all is lost. Even in Tennessee, 43% of the population has received at least one dose of COVID vaccine, and 38% are fully vaccinated. People are hugging one another and kissing babies again, but people are also continuing to die for no good reason. Their stubborn refusal to take a life-saving vaccine is more than a pity, and it's more than a waste. It's a tragedy, a sign that we have squandered our miracle. I have no faith that we will be given another. Well, there you go. You've had your second coming, and it didn't work. So at any rate, yes, interesting perspective, and reminds us of a lot of other things in the news. For instance, the mention that the politicians sometimes taking their vaccines in private and essentially urging everybody else not to do the same for whatever reason. Doesn't make any sense, but big news in the last day or so as it's revealed that as Fox News has been railing against the vaccine and doing everything it can to convince people not to get the vaccine and not to take care in any way, shape, or form during this pandemic, all of the talking heads doing that work, that dirty work on air, have in fact been vaccinated, and we're very often first in line to get the vaccine, but just pretend otherwise on the air. And it was revealed yesterday, although I think we all suspected for a long time that it was the case, that in addition to railing against the vaccine itself, railing against the idea of vaccine passports, calling them medical apartheid or medical Jim Crow even, that they were segregating the population based on their vaccination status. Of course, on a corporate level, doing exactly that, requiring that the people working in the television studios and at their home office be vaccinated in order to return to work, and I'm sure making it difficult to keep your job if you don't return to work. But they have a medical or a clearance system of their own for vaccination that, of course, stands in marked contrast to their on-air complaints about how terrible such a system would be. And I don't know, I guess having been called out most of yesterday the signal was given, at least to Sean Hannity, that he needed to fake something up and make a statement last night insisting that, no, we really do believe in the vaccine and everybody should totally get it, so therefore we're no hypocrites anymore. But we'll see how long that lasts. And, of course, I think they're pretty well aware that they haven't even taken a step back, given the fact that everyone's become so convinced by their months of rhetoric about this stuff that everyone will understand it to have been a wink to make sure that they aren't sued by the government or don't lose any lawsuits if Fox watching family members sue over the wrongful death of any of their loved ones who died on account of believing them about the vaccine versus believing actual scientists. So anyway, that very much in the news. And just to, I guess, skip around on the subject a little bit, just give it an international flavor. I've been wondering about this for a while too. Watching, as you know I do, the Worldometers counters of who's got the virus and where. I've been kind of amazed that the numbers in India have been taking a dive lately, and it looked for all the world like India was going to zoom past us at some point. I think in the distant past at this point that they were going to have surpassed us in terms of raw numbers of cases of COVID in India. But their pace has slowed as they approach the American total. We currently stand, last night, the U.S., according to Worldometers, surpassed the 35 million case mark. That puts us at about 10.5% infection rate nationwide. And India, which was posting 100,000 new cases a day on Worldometers, but presumably actually had many more that weren't reaching us for whatever reason or weren't being reported for whatever reason. I thought that they were going to surpass us a while ago, but they have approached, but they now remain behind us because we are posting numbers nearly as bad on a day-to-day basis at this point. India has brought down the number of cases that they're reporting dramatically into the 35 to 40,000 cases per day range, and unfortunately the United States has gone back up to that level. So as it stands, 35 million cases in the United States, just over 31 million cases in India. Brazil, surprisingly, lagging even further behind at nearly 19.4 million cases. But just, by the way, relative to the rest of the world, at that point, it goes to number 4, Russia, at just over 6 million cases. So again, those numbers in the U.S., 35 million, India, 31, Brazil, 19, Russia, 6, France, 5.8, nearly 6, Turkey, 5.5, UK, coming up on 5.5. You see, nobody else is in, there's only 3 countries in the world openly reporting double digits in the terms of the millions, or I guess we should say 8 figures in total cases. Normalized by population, the story is somewhat different. But at any rate, this news also from the New York Times throws that into some doubt. And you probably had some doubts just initially hearing those numbers. India's true pandemic death toll. Remember, we've been talking about the American true pandemic death tolls probably being closer to a full million, or at least somewhere in the high 900,000s, going by excess death rates. And I don't know exactly how they're calculating this, but India's true pandemic death toll here reported to be likely well over 3 million, which would put them about where you would think that they would be with a population their size and medical and financial resources being what they are across that population versus what they are here in the United States. So probably well over 3 million, according to a new study, anyway. This story by Karandeep Singh, again in the New York Times. The number of people who have died in the coronavirus pandemic in India so far is likely to exceed 3 million, nearly 10 times the official COVID-19 death toll, making it one of the worst human tragedies in the nation's history, according to a new study. In a comprehensive examination of the true toll of the pandemic in the sprawling nation of 1.4 billion people, the Center for Global Development, a Washington research institute, attempted to quantify excess deaths from all causes. I guess there's your answer. Excess deaths at the heart of this again. During the pandemic, based on state data, international estimates, serological studies, and household surveys. True deaths are likely to be in the several millions, not hundreds of thousands, making this arguably India's worst human tragedy, said its authors, one of whom is a former chief economic advisor to the government of Prime Minister Modi, right? So, some connection to governmental sources and authorities here. And I was talking about total cases before, but yeah, when it comes to total deaths, that too is a little bit surprising. Of course, 624,000 plus, now likely to surpass 625,000 today, with India at just officially 414,000, just 414,000 people. Russia, or rather Brazil, they are surpassing India. And so what we're talking about there is a death rate that's much higher per officially reported case. Anyway, remember that in India, 31.1, we'll call it 31.2 million cases. Brazil, 19.4 million cases. Total deaths, according to official numbers, 414,000 in India, but 543,000 in Brazil. Among just 19 million reported cases, they have considerably more deaths. So it's a bigger problem perhaps in Brazil. And their total deaths, just by the way, how many countries are in six figures of total deaths? The answer there, just 11 internationally. U.S. leading the pack, of course. U.S., Brazil, India, Mexico, Peru, Russia, UK, Italy, Colombia, France, and Argentina. The next up would be Germany, currently sitting at nearly 92,000 and still counting, but of course their numbers have slowed down a little bit. We'll see whether that picks up at all with Delta variant. So just giving you some background there. The rest of the article about India, let's dive in a little further here. The official government numbers have been called into question repeatedly, even as funeral pyres lit up the night sky and bodies washed up on the Ganges River. With death all around, the Indian government was widely underreporting the scale of the devastation. A chorus of experts have said the country's official estimates are a gross understatement. The study released on Tuesday estimated that between 3.4 and 4.7 million more people than would normally be expected died between January 2020 and June 2021, and includes an estimate suggesting that deaths from COVID-19 alone may have reached 4 million. I don't know whether they're overcounting in terms of the range of dates that they're talking about here. January 2020 might actually have been a little early for India to start counting. I don't know. Let me take a look at their, I'm just sort of curious about their chart. I mean, the official numbers being what they are, I don't know how much trust you can put in them, but the first officially reported case, I think, in India appears to be, wow, I mean, not even until like May, perhaps early May. So I don't know whether counting excess deaths in January, I mean, I guess excess, no explanation for the deaths. It's got to be something. But at any rate, I don't think that would add tremendously to their expected numbers. But okay, maybe the date range is a little bit off, maybe not, but maybe they know better than I do. Estimating COVID deaths with statistical confidence may prove elusive, the authors of this study wrote, but all estimates suggest that the death toll from the pandemic is likely to be an order of magnitude greater than the official count of 400,000. They also suggest that the first wave was more lethal than is believed. The authors said the undercount of death period after the first wave of infections last year may have resulted in part from the fact that it was spread out in time as opposed to the sharp curve of the second wave when hundreds of thousands of people died amid shortages of oxygen, beds, and vaccines. The study has said that the country's inability to grasp the scale of the tragedy in real time during its first wave from March 2020 to February of 2021 may have caused the collective complacency that led to the horrors of the second wave. At the height of the second wave, interviews by New York Times reporters at cremation grounds across 3 states in India revealed an extensive pattern of deaths far exceeding the official figures. Nervous politicians and hospital administrators may also have undercounted or overlooked large numbers of dead, analysts said, and grieving families may be hiding COVID connections as well out of shame, adding to the confusion. India is still reporting nearly 40,000 new cases and about 500 deaths a day, according to the New York Times database. Less than 7% of the population is fully vaccinated. The challenge of the pandemic is far from over, said Arvind Subramanian. I hope I got that close to correct. That is Mr. Modi's former chief economic advisor and a senior fellow at Brown University, who is a co-author of the study. Vaccination offers the best hope, but its pace needs to be ramped up considerably. Well, that's probably no surprise, but we can probably jump out of the article there. It's almost to the end, but I think we got what we needed out of the headline in the first couple paragraphs. This is pretty interesting. Now, I guess sticking with the COVID theme, and I guess that'll be a theme at least until we talk to Joan later on, although she may want to continue on or find some way of tying things together. Happened upon an interesting take from Greg Sargent at the Plumb Line yesterday. Just this helps us make the segue back to the former guy. A vile new Trump GOP claim about vaccines suggests trouble ahead. What's this new-ish development? Well, it was only a matter of time, it says here, until Donald Trump converted the debate over COVID-19 vaccines into an occasion for his supporters to show their loyalty to him. I mean, I think they've already been doing that by not getting the vaccine. And even worse, to the big lie that his 2020 loss was illegitimate. People are refusing to take the vaccine because they don't trust his, that is Biden's, administration, the former president said in a statement on Sunday, referring to President Biden. They don't trust the election results, and they certainly don't trust the fake news. And that's an interesting and I think new explicit linkage, even though the linkage doesn't stand up to any sort of logic at all. But yeah, so trying to claim that people were not getting the vaccine because they don't trust Biden, even though the vaccine was, remember that he should be claiming that the vaccine was developed under his administration and taking credit for it. But that's out the window for some reason. So there you have it. Trump is telling his supporters that they are correct not to trust the federal government on vaccines because this sentiment should flow naturally from their suspicion that the election was stolen from him. Well, if you can't have an honest election, you can't have a good vaccine, even though the vaccine was developed totally independent of all that. Expressing the former has been magically transformed into a way to show fealty to the latter. That is, if you believe the election was stolen, then it's your duty not to get vaccinated. I don't know how those things came together. And weren't they just crying about how you shouldn't be connecting to issues when the issue was infrastructure? But, no one gives them, any high marks for consistency on anything. This suggests the anti-vaccine mania on the right may only get worse at exactly the moment that we needed to get better. This vile new Trump claim hints at how this is likely to happen with the complicity of even relatively responsible Republicans. I don't think you should call them that, but whatever. We're seeing a new surge in coronavirus cases due to the Delta variant and the lag in vaccinations, with new cases New cases overwhelmingly concentrated among the unvaccinated. Both trends, surging cases and lagging vaccinations, are unfolding primarily in red states. It's bad enough that Trump has now recast the question of whether to trust the federal government on vaccines as a proxy for whether the election was stolen from him. What makes this worse is that other Republicans are playing a version of this game. Consider Senator Bill Cassidy's appearance on Fox News Sunday. Asked about his state's woeful vaccination rate, the Louisiana Republican declared that Americans don't trust government on vaccines because of the partisan comments coming out of the White House regarding the next Jim Crow laws. That's an interesting connection, don't you think? He's depicting himself as an uber partisan, Cassidy said of Biden, as if this is supposed to explain red state distrust of the administration on vaccines developed by the previous administration. This has attracted plenty of ridicule, but the truly pernicious nature of it has gone underappreciated. Cassidy, to be clear, is urging people to get vaccinated, which is good, but he's not telling red state Americans that they should trust the federal government when it comes to vaccines, i.e., that they have eminently reasonable grounds to trust it. Instead, Cassidy recasts this distrust of the feds on the vaccine as a way to register anger at Democrats for calling out GOP efforts to restrict voting that are targeted at African Americans. That's a version of Trump's game, minus the explicit endorsement of the big lie. There is also a vaguely extortive quality to this. If you want us to help you vaccinate our own populations, you better stop calling out our voter suppression efforts for what they are. And that does seem rather extortive, don't you think? We're probably not likely to go along with that one. Republican and right-wing efforts to encourage vaccine skepticism among GOP voters are unfolding on a spectrum. At the extreme end, GOP members of Congress rail at needle Nazis and suggest federal vaccine outreach is a slippery slope to confiscation of guns and Bibles. I've seen that one. If you knock on the door and ask me if I'm vaccinated, that's because you're really there to take my guns and Bibles. And we really ought to kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone. But of course, that has nothing to do with anything. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. Let's continue on here. Should we continue with Greg Sargent's piece? I guess so. We're nearing the end of that one, but I do want to jump to a couple of other things here. But he usually will make a couple extra good points towards the end here. Where were we? Right, so the extortive nature of what Cassidy was saying. Trump is making this worse. That's obvious enough. Trusting the feds on vaccines is tantamount to endorsing the idea that I legitimately lost the election, is what he's saying. How long until aspiring GOP primary candidates start running with their own versions of this nonsense? This linkage, and we hate linkage, is telling in another sense. Again and again, Republicans could have taken what Democratic strategist Simon Rosenberg calls off-ramps from ongoing GOP radicalization. Republicans fed Trump's lie about the outcome for many weeks after the election. They responded to their 2020 losses with an unprecedented wave of voter suppression and anti-majoritarian tactics. They've drifted away from condemning Trump's role in the insurrection and are now actively downplaying the violence itself and even rewriting its history. They've refused to support a serious January 6th accounting. Now, they're either largely tolerating or actively encouraging deepening vaccine derangement among their own voters. Given that Trump has now entangled this with the GOP's turn away from democracy, how many Republicans do you think will step up to condemn it? It's a good point and a good question. Onwards and upwards from there, though. Other things to take note of. But even before I leave the coronavirus stuff behind, though we could discuss it on Thursday, perhaps with Greg, just a note. Oh, look at that. Something went wrong. And does that mean that he's deleted the tweet or that something else went wrong here? But I had a Twitter thread. It's back. Okay, just something wrong in loading it. From Eric Feigelding, whose tweet threads we've read before. He is, in fact, an epidemiologist and health economist. and tweeting this one, which I think, I don't know what supports all of this thought, but it worried me too. He labels it worried by saying he's worried about, we are now seeing lots of outdoor-only Delta variant transmission. In other words, so transmissible is this new Delta variant that the claim here is that keeping your activities outside might not even provide any particular protection against its transmission. It seems hard to believe, but the danger of the Delta variant for a while anyway, has been reported just how transmissible it is, and that mere incidental contact is enough to transmit the virus, as opposed to remember the stuff we were hearing back in the days when they weren't even hardly admitting that it was airborne. You had to be in close proximity, like inside of 6 feet, which was an arbitrary number to begin with, for something greater than 15 minutes, which was also an arbitrary number. But the point is that they were trying to convey to you was that being coughed on once might not actually be enough to do the trick, although getting coughed on with droplets and everything probably didn't help. It wasn't a great thing to have happen to you, but just being, in the same area, breathing the same air as somebody who was infected, it would take some considerable length of time before the danger of infection was all that great for you. But with something that can spread by incidental contact, the old strains where you needed to be breathing the same air as somebody else for 15 minutes, the likelihood of breathing it in great enough concentration for you to get infected was, I think, intuitively diminished. You understood it intuitively that the chances were diminished if you were interacting outdoors, where air currents would make it difficult for that same air to be hanging around in a cloud around your head for those 15 minutes. Just the natural airflow outdoors would minimize that likelihood. But incidental contact is something that basically, unless you're meeting somebody outdoors in hurricane conditions, there's a much greater chance that just a few, seconds in close contact with somebody, even outdoors, could transmit it. So, as Eric Feigelding is saying here, we're now seeing lots of outdoor-only Delta variant transmission between strangers with no direct contact. These sports attendees, in this tweet he's retweeting here from Dr. Noor Bari, these sports attendees weren't even sitting together. Likely, it was fleeting transmission at pinch points, that is, bottlenecks, like, for instance, at stadium gates. This would change everything. The tweet that he's included here says here, it's, I guess, some hospital somewhere saying, they just said that they have seen transmission between strangers sitting outside the whole time at a sports event. Although, quite honestly, I'm not certain that that's a brand new thing, because wasn't it the case that the early, very severe outbreak in Italy was attributed to transmission at soccer games, which are packed houses, to be sure, but do take place largely outside? I mean, I guess maybe you have to modify what you're talking about when you're talking about an outdoor venue. If it's an outdoor venue where you cram 100,000 people into a bowl, I don't know how good that is versus, say, being at the beach, where people are at least a little bit spread out, even if it is almost shoulder to shoulder. Plus, of course, open breezes at the seaside, much different than inside of a stadium. But anyway, that is somewhat worrying. He goes on to explain that there are other examples of similar things happening, and so it is in fact worrying. And I guess if it's transmissible with fleeting contact, definitely something to worry about. Maybe we'll let Greg analyze that at some later date instead, but just thought I'd put that one out there. And let's skip around to a couple other shorter stories that I wanted to share with you. One being, one more COVID one. I'll just note for the record, NBC reporting that the American Academy of Pediatrics apparently releasing a statement on Monday, updated guidance for the COVID era, recommending universal masking when kids return to school this upcoming school year. Almost all schools will be open in person again, and they are recommending, I guess, given the fact that school-age populations less vaccinated generally than the adult population where it's been available for longer, that the kids return in masks. I don't think that's a bad idea at all. I'm curious to see how most school systems handle it. I think that around here they'll probably be comfortable asking kids to attend in person but attend in masks. In other places, probably not so much. And we'll see what role politics plays in dealing with that. Now, in no crap news, but that nonetheless is getting reported because it is a lie to which Republicans, or rather Trump operatives, have finally copped, and that's always worth noting. Business Insider reporting this. I don't know if it's their own original reporting or not, but former Trump aide, and here we're talking about Corey Lewandowski, says the Trump campaign, paid actors to appear at his 2016 presidential announcement. No crap. I think we all kind of knew that. That's been the rumor since the very hour of the event itself, up to and including evidence of advertisements having been placed in the local newspapers and copied for the record, asking for people to show up in exchange for pay. The bullet points at the top of the piece probably tell us all we need to know. Corey Lewandowski previously denied that Trump paid actors to appear at his 2015 campaign announcement. You remember the Golden Escalator announcement. Yet the first Trump 2016 campaign manager, Lewandowski, recently told Insider the opposite. Insider reported the moment as part of its definitive oral history of Trump's rise in the GOP. And that's it for the bullet points of interest. You could fill in the details, I guess, by taking a look here. Is it something we want to spend time on, or something we just want to make note of and move on? Let's say we'll do that. But just for the record, it does say here in the piece, the Trump campaign fiercely rejected those claims that paid actors had appeared there. Corey Lewandowski, then Trump's campaign manager, told Insider then that he, quote, unequivocally denied the allegations. He went on to say, Donald Trump, there is nobody who believes that when Donald Trump goes somewhere, he does not generate the biggest, largest, and most rambunctious crowds on the planet, Lewandowski said. It's just not true, unequivocally. The Donald Trump campaign and Donald Trump did not pay anybody to attend his announcement. Fast forward to today, and Lewandowski has another take on the situation. That's a Michael Cohen special, Lewandowski told Insider. Michael Cohen decided that he was going to hire one of his buddies and pay his buddy without getting any campaign approval. $50 for every person to come in to stand in Trump Tower. Cohen, then Trump's personal attorney, had a different assessment. Speaking to Insider for the Trump Oral History Project, he said Lewandowski was fibbing about the payments to actors. Cohen said Trump hired David Schwartz, a partner at the public relations firm Gotham Government Relations and Communications, to organize the event professionally. Any allegations of payments to actors is a complete lie, or absolute lie, that was promoted by Corey Lewandowski, said Cohen. So I don't know whether Cohen is saying that they hired no actors or just that Lewandowski is lying about it being his idea. But there's more here. Reached for comment. Schwartz confirmed to Insider his firm had been hired to orchestrate the entire campaign announcement. The event was really our brainchild. Won't even give Trump the credit for that one. The most famous escalator ride in the history of politics was that one. It's the only escalator ride in the history of politics, as far as I know. Bottom line is, we had thousands of people there, and then the press accused us of hiring thousands of actors. Based on the fee that I got, that would not have been good business decision on anyone's part. The reality is we hired 50 people, some of whom were part-time actors, I found out later on, but we hired 50 people to help coordinate an event that brought in thousands of people, Schwartz added, but it didn't. I mean, remember, it was in the lobby of Trump Tower. They don't have room for that many people. A 2-minute video posted on June 16, 2015 on YouTube from Schwartz's firm touts its work at the Trump campaign event. It features Schwartz using a bullhorn and leading a call and response to the pro-Trump crowd in the lobby of Trump Tower. Yada, yada, blah, 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 something, something. But anyway, I think basically it reconfirms all the rumors, and it's just a question of who is willing to take the rap for doing the hiring and who wants to lay it off on other people. All right, that's of some interest. Probably of more interest to the rest of you. The news broke yesterday, reported chiefly in Government Executive or govexec.com. The disappointing, let's say, news, probably something that Joan might want to discuss. The disappointing news being that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, will not prosecute Trump officials after the Inspector General referred findings of false testimony to Congress. Investigators verified that former Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross misled Congress, lied to Congress, but the Justice Department said it won't pursue prosecution. Oh my goodness, I can't believe that is the case. Eric Katz, senior correspondent at Government Executive, writes this up for us. The Justice Department has declined to prosecute former Trump administration officials, including former Commerce Department Secretary Wilbur Ross. You remember him, slippers, fell asleep a lot. After an Inspector General confirmed they provided false testimony regarding, what's it about? The origins of the proposed citizenship question on the 2020 census. You remember the controversy now. And they were asked straight up in hearings before Congress about how that question got launched and why they were trying to do it and what the purpose was and who was doing what to try to get it in there. And they lied. And the Commerce Department Inspector General launched a probe in 2019 following a request from lawmakers. The investigators did not make their report public, citing Privacy Act concerns, but said in a letter to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Representative Carolyn Maloney, the House Oversight Committee chair, that Ross and other officials played a substantive role in proposing the addition of this citizenship question on the census. The proposal caused significant controversy, as critics said it would deter non-citizens from participating in the count at all, and it was eventually struck down by the Supreme Court. I mean, that's worth reminding everybody that it was serious enough a problem that the court was willing to intervene and say, no, you can't do this. It interferes with the main purpose of a constitutionally mandated census, and you're doing it probably for racist and xenophobic reasons and anti-immigrant reasons, and we don't need that for anything. But anyway, Wilbur Ross, well accustomed to this sort of lying, and of course murdering his minors at Sago, so whatever, nothing's going to disturb him at this point. He's going to sleep through the whole thing. But basically asked straight up about this stuff by Congress. I don't know whether they needed to subpoena him for that one, but he would have been among the many people that they probably threatened with subpoena to try to secure testimony. And we all know how the subpoena fight has been going over the past decade or more in Congress. And here we have somebody perjuring themselves before Congress who could very easily be held in contempt and charged with that perjury. But the DOJ says, what are you going to do? I mean, it's been referred to them by the Inspector General, who recommends prosecution, but they say, well, prosecutorial discretion, we're just not going to do it. I don't know whether they think it's actually going to be difficult to get a conviction. I don't know if they're waiting for something else. Maybe it's possible that a referral from the IG to them is not as compelling, but a referral from Congress might be, and maybe a simple resolution that says, yeah, we think, given our own findings and our own investigation, now bolstered by the Inspector General's investigation, asking that there be prosecution for perjury, I guess, or at least for misleading Congress in some fashion, right? That there ought to be a prosecution. Now, oh, look at this. Joan forwards to us this, before we get any further into it, that the story was wrong. AP reported that Biden's DOJ declined to prosecute Wilbur Ross when it actually happened in January 2020 under Barr. Oh, okay. So that the declination of prosecution was in the last days of the Trump administration, as opposed to something being current under Merrick Garland. They have issued a correction at the bottom of the article. This was a pretty big mistake, says the tweet of Clearing the Fog. So we'll take a look at this. There's an article and a clip. The article, the clip saying this story has been corrected to reflect that the decision not to prosecute Ross was made by the Department of Justice during the Trump administration, not the Biden administration. Of course, I will say we're 6 months into the Biden administration, and I haven't seen any prosecution. I don't know whether that's something they think they can reverse, but I'd like it would be an interesting explanation. I suppose if the department had issued to him at some point that they were declining to prosecute, first of all, that would be no surprise, but I don't know that it's irreversible. So I guess that's the question for today for reporters, to go to the DOJ and ask, say, are you planning on reversing that by any chance? And if not, why not? And is that something you can reverse? Well, I'm curious to see how the rest of this government executive article reads out, and we'll see if we can pick out some hints that the thing was actually different. Maybe Joan must be anxious to explain how that could be, rather than waiting until later. So this is great. We get some extra time with you today. Good morning, Joan. How are you?
Good morning. I'm only writing about infrastructure, so
okay.
I have nothing new to say on that. So I thought I would just chime in a little early on this one.
Sure.
Yeah, this was sort of a problem with AP.
All right. I was reading a different article. But
saying Garland has refused to done this when it was actually.
Yeah, I wasn't reading any AP article about
to do it, so
I ought to, I guess.
I mean that's an important clarification. However, the larger issue of whether or not they're going to actually be prosecutions out of this Department of Justice of Trump officials is certainly in question.
Yeah, I'd like to know what the answer to that is going to be, and I'd love to have an answer to the next question, which is, does it matter that Barr said he wasn't going to prosecute if Garland decides otherwise? Does he have an opportunity to do that? And if he does, why not do it? And we are 6 months into this. I mean, Garland hasn't been around all 6 months, of course. But it would be a good thing, for instance, to spend some time on, I guess, today at the Department of Justice. They could do that in an afternoon briefing. The day hasn't been, underway, I guess, for long enough to rule out the possibility that would happen. I'm trying to get to this AP News article about it. I was reading from Government Executive, which was circulated widely, and I mean, appears to get more or less the same conclusion, although I don't know that I have read so far anywhere in the Government Executive article that Merrick Garland has just said flat no to this. So that so far hasn't been asserted.
And that's sort of how from the AP story we all came to the conclusion that it wasn't going to be happening.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Yeah, did the AP story, I guess now I'm looking at the corrected version, did it at some point say Merrick Garland says no, or did it just say DOJ has so far declined to prosecute?
I'm not
sure.
Let's see. The correction just says the story has been corrected to reflect. So this is new. You don't see Garland's name in it. It has been corrected to report the decision not to prosecute Ross made by the Department of Justice during the Trump administration, not the Biden administration.
Okay.
Let us see. I can only go back to the Daily Coast story that we had about it yesterday to see if we've got different quotes from the story.
That's a good idea.
And I'm looking
we preserve
now.
the record there.
Because I don't know how to work the Wayback Machine.
Oh, well, yeah, that would be more. But that's a good idea. What were we? What was Daily Kos saying was the quote.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Hunter used the government executive
Ah,
story.
okay. Yeah, I mean that's the only one I saw being circulated at the time that I grabbed it, and I don't know what's
Yeah.
the timestamp on
So,
these two things, but okay. Well, I guess it doesn't rule it out, but yeah, what I'm not seeing is any discussion so far of there's a correction on the government executive story at the bottom. After publication of this story, the Justice Department and Commerce Department Inspector General, both I guess, revealed additional information to indicate the declination to prosecute took place under the Trump administration. The story has been corrected to note this information. So neither of them are the original story, so we can't use
go
that
back to
as...
see exactly what they said.
Yeah. But okay. Even so, yes, I guess that makes today's story. And this was only breaking yesterday, which is also amazing given that if the story really is that the declination was under the Trump administration, that it is July 20th, and it is allegedly fresh news that there was this declination. I find that surprising all by itself.
We weren't paying this much attention to
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I guess they didn't release
Trump's Justice Department in 2020.
it.
Apparently not.
Yeah. Well, they did everything they could to keep it quiet. I think both stories note that they didn't make a public release of their report, but they did, I'm sure, report by letter back to the oversight committees. And it may be that, I don't know, I guess it could be that, the Trump Justice Department didn't actually craft that letter and just handed over all the files and said, you clean it up in the new administration. And then it took a while to get an attorney general, and then they did their best to run through these things. And I'm sure there was a pile of criminality left behind. And then they just, I don't know, maybe the story is that they just recently said, okay, so the IG says to prosecute, but Barr declined. That's, and that may not have been top priority for the last couple of months. Of course, Barr declined. I think everybody's going to know that. But eventually we're going to have to issue this letter. And, they may have issued the letter saying, I know this is only going to result in people saying, that's outrageous. You should reverse this decision. And then we will. Or maybe they'll say, or we want to, but we think we can't. I mean, who knows what there is out there. They may say, well, once an attorney general gives you the all clear, and that's not double jeopardy. He's never been charged, but who knows?
Right.
Well, we can't indict a sitting president. Well, you can't indict an old man in slippers either. I don't know. That could be in a book somewhere. So, I don't know. Now we have to sit and watch for that, and
Now it's going to be getting a lot more attention, which is
that's
probably good. A lot more people are going to be sitting and watching to see what Garland does on that.
Yeah, and here we have a product of the news cycle. Like, I found that out yesterday. How come we haven't heard so far? Because, the daily briefing at the Justice Department probably doesn't take place until 2 o'clock, and they'll ask that question, and they'll say, in the old administration, they would say, we're looking at that very strongly. And now they'll say, we'll look into that. So, I don't know. It's going to be a couple of days before they find out. And even then, it's still Merrick Garland.
Yeah.
So who knows? Though I think there was some good-ish Merrick Garland news yesterday. And another AP story that is Garland formally prohibits seizure of reporters' records. That sounds good.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
I mean, okay. So, and I don't know. That came out maybe an hour or so after this story appeared to break. Maybe they said, quick, let's say something.
There's something good out there.
Yeah, maybe that was enough.
Yeah.
I don't know. All right. Well,
it's
do
instructive certainly for traditional media to check all of their sources. It's instructional for non-traditional media to say,
that might not be true. So, okay. I'm glad that took a different turn anyway, because that was very discouraging. A lot of people, just threw that on the pile of complaints that they have about Merrick Garland. And they're not invalid complaints. But
no,
it was a
they're
bad
not invalid
morning
complaints.
for him.
And I think a lot of us are still thinking, Doug Jones
Yeah.
was pretty much on the ball with things. So
Yeah. And, it's unfortunate that it played out this way. And so many people they seemed excited about Merrick Garland, mostly because they were just angry about his having not been given the hearing and vote for his nomination to the Supreme Court. And, people who weren't particularly familiar with Merrick Garland, I guess, just thought, well, our president wants this guy on the Supreme Court, and it's evil not to give him a vote. And I don't know, maybe worshipped him as a hero that he never was. But we can either return to that or take a different tack when we return. I thank you for calling in early. She's still going to be around, everybody. The music doesn't mean goodbye. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got some bonus time with Joan. She's already here. You've heard that. The smoke from your wildfires is here as well, apparently, and turning the sky red at sunrise. So that was talk of the East Coast this morning.
You got our smoke, huh?
Yeah, I guess so. It doesn't smell like anything, but I guess upper atmosphere, making it hazy. But that's just sort of, that always happens.
Oh, you're not getting the full experience then.
No, we don't.
Get the smell, too.
Yeah, we got to move closer. I'll just smell neighbors' barbecues and call it even.
Pretend.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
well,
it's grim out here, let's just say that. Although, the thing about smoke is that it keeps it cooler.
Oh, well, yeah, block out the sun a little bit.
Temperatures don't get as hot quite when we have a layer of smoke. So instead of being 100 today, it's probably going to be 96.
Ah, well, I guess that's some small consolation, although, that stuff that causes smoke, that's pretty hot too. So,
yeah.
I'm not talking about the sun being that. The sun's hotter. Don't get me wrong. I know science. I accept it. But
you're going to probably be seeing this for, as long as we are, depending on how the jet stream goes, because the big fire, the Bootlick fire in southern Oregon that is causing the greatest amount of smoke, I mean, this is a huge, huge fire, won't be out until October, probably, because we're not going to get rain. And it's the only thing that will finally put the fire out is Mother Nature with rain or with snow. And I think it's likelier it's going to be snow.
Okay. Well, then it'll be around for a while. I mean, it isn't unusual. It's a fairly frequent occurrence that they'll report this.
That you guys get the smoke?
That we get the smoke, for a while, but then the winds shift, give the Canadians the smoke for a little while, then maybe send some to Tennessee. Comes back, but
there's a lot that is unusual.
Well, yeah, I mean, having as many fires certainly
is July, and we have this huge of a fire that it follows on the record heat wave. That it follows on record drought. There's a lot that's unusual about this fire.
It makes sense, but
at the same time, this is now the new normal.
Yeah. Well, one thing will follow from another, and. We're all dealing with it, but at least we don't have the smell. Now, let's see, other things.
I would like you to have the smell. I would like Washington, D.C. to be completely encased
I guess that would help you.
Forest fire smoke from the west, So that maybe, just maybe, while they're talking about all of this critical infrastructure stuff with climate change legislation folded in, they actually have a sense of urgency about it.
It could help. It could help people understand the scope of the problem. Of course, Republicans would say, that's the smell of our cities burning because of Antifa. And I don't know how many people would believe that.
Yes, they probably would.
You know, it might work.
It is just really very strange to be hearing these completely disconnected procedural debates among Republicans in particular in D.C., and to have Joe Manchin say that he's really, really concerned about how much climate there is in this bill when we're living out here in the inferno.
Yeah, I guess that is difficult to believe that people wouldn't consider your perspective in all this. But well, you could make a motion to proceed to putting the fire out.
Ahistorical flooding in the Midwest.
Oh.
Or look at Germany.
Yeah, that we've seen, certainly. Has it been ahistorical, the flooding in the Midwest? It seems like something that's an annual event too, but are we at the wrong time of year?
We're at the wrong time of year. Okay. All of the rain that's happening in New England is a lot.
All right.
Maybe not ahistorical, but it's an awful lot.
Yeah.
But, the flash flooding, the New York subways being flooded.
Oh, yes, right. That's true. I can see that.
Just, there's a lot happening right now.
Yeah. That's usually
a Delta variant
thing. Yeah,
which
right.
isn't really climate change, but, it's kind of up there in terms of criticality, and maybe, we should be talking about things other than the hurt feelings of Republicans in the Capitol Hill press.
that could be. But that's what captivates their minds, and it's an air-conditioned environment, and hard to see what's actually going on elsewhere. Although, I think the drifting smoke...
I think it's just particularly hard for Capitol Hill reporters to break out of their habits.
Yeah.
And their favorite habit is to run to a Republican to get a complaint about a Democrat being unfair to them.
Yeah, well, that's an easy story. So, yes. Also over the break, you corrected the record for us here, and we'll do it again so everyone can hear it. The motion to proceed that Chuck Schumer still has scheduled for tomorrow is in fact a motion to proceed to consideration of the what was once called the BIF, but the bipartisan bill, or as they said, bilateral infrastructure framework, which still isn't the bill. It hasn't been written down anywhere, but it isn't a motion to proceed to consideration of the budget, but rather the other bill, which would be brought under regular order, would require 60 votes in order to get cloture on the bill itself. But still, in all, not surprising at all that anybody would say, yeah, okay, we haven't committed it all to paper here yet, but we're not saying we're filing for cloture on consideration of the bill. We're asking you to move to bring it up so that we can have that debate openly.
Schumer was actually very, very clear about this. He said,
okay. Well, I didn't read
not a deadline. We're not trying to pass every detail of the bill.
Okay.
It's just we're ready to begin debating and amending a bill.
Yeah. I mean, that's sensible enough. And
which, he's kind of trying to push them, I think, to actually give him a bill. There is no legislative text.
None at all.
There is no bill. They have been working on this since June 10th.
Okay.
At least that's when we got the press release from Portman and Sinema.
That's a while, so a month plus, and no text.
Well, and before that, we had Capito meeting with Biden.
Right. Okay, so
at least
longer.
Once a week. So you would think by now there would be something on paper.
Yeah.
In legislative text form.
And I mean, maybe the call for a vote,
as far as anybody knows, there is not.
All right. It may be that the call for a vote is meant to highlight that. Probably is, and say, well,
I think it probably is.
we
It's
debate,
as Schumer saying, all right, finally, either this is a farce or it's not, and we're going to make you show your hand. Because I think it's pretty much a farce. It's been Republicans using every tactic that they have always used to delay. Look at Obamacare and the months
I guess so.
Mags Baucus spent with Chuck Grassley on something that Republicans had absolutely no intention of supporting ever anyway.
Yeah.
That we're having to go through this exercise again is a little frustrating. But, it is clarifying in ways that are important, like the absolute refusal of Republicans to go along with the idea that everybody has to pay their taxes.
Okay, yes, right.
This was their breaking point this week, that the bill would have given more funding to the IRS, so the IRS had enforcement capability.
Yes.
So that they could make people actually pay the taxes that they owe.
Yes.
Not new taxes, not hiked taxes for anybody, but enforcement so that all of those rich people who can hire accountants and lawyers to delay their taxes, to avoid their taxes, can't do that necessarily anymore, or at least that the IRS also has lawyers and accountants on its side that it can hire.
That might be helpful.
to fight back. And Republicans, nope, can't do that. Can't do that because Lois Lerner.
Yes, something, which also didn't...
Which was not a real thing. Lois Lerner was... She was IRS commissioner.
Yeah, I think so.
And she was at the IRS when the Tea Party had their big non-scandal where they were being unfairly targeted, but they weren't. Wasn't that what it was?
Yeah, they were upset at allegedly being, they were worried about being denied tax-exempt status for, highly political operations, which is how that should go. But, yeah, their claim was that there were, a million different Tea Party groups filing for their own organization and then their own tax exemptions. And you remember the proliferation. If you didn't get elected the president of your local Tea Party, you would instead say, well, I'm a Tea Party Express. Like, that's different. And, or, whatever, Tea Party Patriots. And then they were filing for tax exemption as nonprofits, as educational organizations. We want to educate our elected officials and acclimate them to the fact that we will come to their events and boo and heckle them and throw rotten tomatoes at them and hound them at their houses unless they change their votes to what we want. See, that's our educational program. It's not a political program. So we're entitled to tax-exempt status. And Lois Lerner saying to them, one, no, and that also Democratic organizations that would seek the same thing, or Democratic-leaning organizations seeking the same exemption would also not get it. But they said, look, here's 5 instances of totally bogus applications from Tea Party organizations being denied.
Right.
That was enough.
And it was actually not even denying their applications. It was just investigating them thoroughly to make sure that, yes, indeed, they were nonprofit, quote-unquote, organizations.
They met the requirements, and they often didn't. And so
anyway...
So they defunded the tax police.
8 years later, here we are, Republicans using that as their excuse to save rich people from having to pay the taxes that they already owe.
Right. And it would be interesting to see. The IRS may very well say, yeah, we want to use 100% of these resources to capture just straight up income taxes that people owe and aren't paying, and we're not interested in finding Tea Party groups because they're gone anyway. And most of them have turned into Trump groups anyhow. But that wouldn't satisfy them. And it is very much, it's an interesting parallel to defund the police, because the police that they worry about are the white-collar crime police, the IRS. That they have no problem defunding. Plus, of course, they're also happy to defund, I don't know, say, police that keep them from rioting and taking over the Capitol. Happy to get rid of them.
Yeah,
as
they're
well.
not really anxious to fund the Capitol Police.
No. Seems like rank hypocrisy. But why would you report on that?
What else is new, huh?
Yeah. Right. Not interesting enough to
The
report
problem.
on.
They are so immune to accusations of hypocrisy that, what's the point in calling them hypocrites? Everybody knows it.
Right.
Although I suppose that the Beltway press doesn't necessarily know it, because here they are very credibly reporting that Republicans are aghast that they have had no time to actually do legislation, and here is Chuck Schumer trying to make them do legislation, and they can run to a reporter and say that and have it repeated.
Right. I wasn't given a warning that we would be voting on this thing that I was working on. Well, what did you think you were going to be doing with it? I mean, isn't that what most senators do with things they're working on? Vote on them? Well, I'm not ready yet. Well, how about if you got ready?
And, you will see stories about how this definitely has echoes of the Obamacare time, because Democrats keep saying this has echoes of Obamacare.
Yeah, I
so,
have to write that down,
reporters
too.
will say that, but they will still go to those same Republicans to get those same quotes about how unfair it all is.
Yep, yeah, and, that works. And they get in the paper, and I guess they feel they've covered both sides adequately, and that even... If one says, one side is saying, we think the Senate should write bills and vote on them, and the other is saying, that's unfair. And that seems like a weird thing to write if you're a political reporter, but that's what they've got. That was the quote he said. So I wrote it, and that was it.
And
all
that
right.
was it.
Boo. Bad
Boo.
news.
Boo.
Yeah.
Do better. People do better.
And let's
I don't know
see,
what to say.
Yeah.
There's
not much more to it.
It's been a frustrating time reporting on infrastructure when, we had all of the momentum coming out of the coronavirus legislation, the American Rescue Plan.
Yeah.
That moved along quickly. There was just, no question that Republicans were going to support it, because they weren't. And so we said, okay, reconciliation, we're doing it. Mm-hmm. And, immediately after, in April, Biden comes out with his very aggressive infrastructure and human infrastructure plans. And they're fantastic, and everybody loves them. They're hugely popular with voters. Mm-hmm. And here it is, moving toward the end of July, and there hasn't been a vote taken.
Yeah, I think it's pretty... Well, it's certainly sad. Although now it makes me think... I just saw somebody discussing stuff, bringing us back to the filibuster issues on Twitter the other day, and saying, for all the talk about people, moderates, say, if I'm not willing to get rid of the filibuster, then I'm certainly happy to say I'm for the talking filibuster, or the standing filibuster, as some people are calling it, and bringing back the old school thing. And as students of the rules have been saying for a while, without changing the rules, you could in fact enforce that kind of filibuster. You could force Republicans, if they're going to filibuster, to do things that way. And there are rules on the books that if you're very careful about monitoring who has spoken and for how long, and you're willing to just sit there and not file for cloture, and not look to cloture for as the mechanism for forcing a debate to an end, but rather say, talk until you exhaust yourselves, and when you get exhausted and you sit down and we take note of what your name was, you've already spoken on this bill. There are, in fact, rules that have fallen into disuse about how many times you can rise to speak to a certain bill. And eventually they'll run out of people to do it, but it's been abandoned as a way of getting a debate to end, because it means you really do have to sit there and listen to this garbage until they exhaust themselves, and nothing else can happen. No other bills can be considered. Ordinarily, that's a really bad thing because we have business to conduct. But I suppose if we're not literally just not passing anything, although, small bore stuff is passing in the meantime while we're waiting for legislative language or waiting for Republicans to agree, yes, we should finally vote on something. Other things are passing, but I guess at some point we run out of dumb stuff to occupy our time with, but I guess...
Well, you can't go into executive session then
right, okay.
for nominations?
That's probably true, too, and we're not full up on those. And how is that going? I know there were a lot of judges appointed.
And there's still judges being appointed,
yeah.
and that's still good.
Sure. Are we behind?
There are some some executive nominations that are still open, that are a problem. I just saw one today, the budget issue, OMB. We apparently don't have anybody. So there are still some gaps.
All right.
But he's doing a good job on getting vacancies filled on the courts.
Yes.
That's not necessarily enough. We
should make some more.
Need to be looking at expanding those courts.
Right. Let's have some more. We fill them so nicely, so what's the big problem? We'll create some more. It doesn't mean that there'll be a backlog. Just create some more seats. We'll fill them real soon. But they don't like what we fill them with. Oh, I see. All right. Well, that's a problem. But, I guess there's just not that much legislatively standing in the way. And ultimately, maybe the two theories come together in saying, well, if you could only really enforce these rules that have fallen into disuse at a time when you have no interest in passing any more legislation, or at least for a very long time, you have nothing urgent to bring to the floor. And there is a time during which nothing urgent does come to the floor, and that's the August recess, because nobody's there.
Right.
And you have been calling since forever for, well, why don't you cancel or at least shorten the recess so that you can get some of this important work done. If you think it's too early to have a vote to start debate on infrastructure, then, you're wrong, but sadly we have to do it at some point.
That's part of what Schumer's doing here.
Yeah?
He's putting August into question for everybody by saying, okay, here's the vote. If you're not ready now, when are you going to be ready? Right. Okay, we're staying in August.
Okay.
That is undoubtedly part of the underlying threat here in having this vote tomorrow.
That you would think, right? If you're not ready now, but August is coming, you can't wait forever, right? So when will you be ready? If you want to have an August recess, start now and get to work. And if you think that you're just going to let it slide until September, no. That won't work.
Pretty much, because, again, we have stuff happening in September that they're at least aware of. There hasn't been a lot of focus on it. I think people don't like to talk about. Mm-hmm. How are we keeping government open after September 30th? What happens to the debt ceiling?
Yeah.
Those are tension-creating discussions, so I think that they're probably not trying to highlight them, but everybody's very well aware that this is happening in the background.
Yeah. And
particularly debt ceiling. It's really unclear right now. July 30th is it's a real deadline, but that's when the suspension of the debt ceiling ends. 2 years ago, Congress decided, okay, and this was a smart decision considering they were dealing with Trump, we're just going to take the debt ceiling away as a hostage.
Yeah.
We're just going to say we're suspending that limit for 2 years. Yes, they're putting it into the middle of the next president's first term, but at least they're taking it away from Trump. Yeah. So that ends on July 30th.
Okay, they just say disregard it until then.
Yeah.
So you could continue
and
to do
Treasury
that.
Really isn't sure how long they have until the debt limit's reached. They always have some measures they can take to sort of shuffle money around so it's not a problem. But with the relief program, with the checks going out to parents for the child tax credit, with a number of things, they're just not really sure how much leeway they're going to have to extend the debt ceiling into the fall. Mm-hmm. It could happen in August. It could happen in September. They just don't know right now. So it is something, hopefully, I would like to see another suspension. I would like to see it to go away permanently.
Sure.
Seriously. I mean, it's just such a fake thing.
Yeah. I mean, right. We've certainly mentioned it in the past. It doesn't really make any sense. They always extend it anyway. Or you can, I mean, the fact that you can just suspend it for the next 2 years, who cares? We're just not, it wasn't that they raised it so high that it was irrelevant. It was that they just said, literally, don't look. Which suggests that maybe it's not that important. Yeah.
And the sky doesn't fall when you do it.
Yeah. It only,
only if you let's do that again. Only maybe permanently. Take that hostage away.
Yeah.
They started doing these debt ceiling annual things because they thought, oh, here's a really good opportunity to force us.
Yes.
To force us to buckle down and deal with the deficit and just get stuff done. And of course, it's never worked that way.
No.
At least not since McConnell decided it was a good hostage to take. So
they lost the sense of urgency of it as a must pass at some point, and so if it's not that anymore to you, then fine, don't use it. I mean, there's plenty of other things that are still must pass, but
government funding as of October 1.
Right. Yeah. So when they come together, it's I guess it's easy to lump them into the same category, but which is fine. That's another thing. We really probably ought to require that they mandate that they be coordinated so that there's only this one choke point available. It's quite annoying that when it gets out of sync, that the must pass appropriations and other budgetary legislation happens and we mop our brow and phew, we made it through after 6 CRs or whatever, and then find out we finally wrap everything up in January rather than in September, and then all of a sudden the debt ceiling is upon us again like 2 months after that. When they line up, it's a lot easier.
It's a lot easier when they line up.
But all right, but getting rid of it is even easier. So,
hopefully they do that again.
Okay.
And we don't know.
Can happen in reconciliation.
We don't know what McConnell and Republicans are going to pull out of their hats when Democrats when all of this falls apart on infrastructure and there is no help from Republicans on infrastructure and Democrats have to pass a massive budget reconciliation bill that has that in it, has the hard infrastructure in it because that has to be done. Mm-hmm. Sanders is already talking about, we'll just fold it in and it will be a very big bill.
Yeah.
The kind of monkey wrenching we're going to see from McConnell on that, followed by government funding, continuing resolutions, followed by debt ceiling, is going to be a lit month.
Okay, to say the least. I still have not seen anybody say that they were considering putting a debt ceiling hike, either an extraordinarily large one or even a small one. I don't know if you could necessarily do suspension, but the fact that it's available as a reconciliation instruction.
Yeah,
but we haven't seen it done that way. It needs to be,
and they have
put it in there.
I've seen rumors of it.
Okay,
I haven't seen real discussion.
All right, well, I'll take the rumors because we used to not even get that. It's been a long time since they raised the debt ceiling that way. I can't remember them ever doing that in modern memory, but it is available, and you would think just as a safety valve, put it in there and don't use it. That's allowed, but put it in there so that if you find yourself over a barrel, you say, you know what, fine. We're putting that in the reconciliation bill too. Take that leverage point away. Why wouldn't you? But it'll lead to attacks. Oh, Democrats are using the outrageous reconciliation procedure to, blah, blah. Yeah. But that's coming in.
Everything's going to lead to an attack. Sure. So just don't even have that as a consideration anymore, Democrats. You're going to be attacked by Republicans, period.
So be used to it. All right. Well, that's understandable They haven't brought it up yet, so they don't get preemptive attacks. But you can quietly put it in there, and hopefully they're aware of it. All right. Well, thanks for coming on so early today. And it was great. Like, we're telling the wrong story and immediately corrected. Thank you for monitoring the show and jumping in. Much appreciated. Hope everyone has the story straight now. And maybe by tomorrow, maybe sometime this afternoon, we'll hear something from Department of Justice about what they can and can't do about it.
I wouldn't necessarily hold my breath, but yeah, maybe.
Well, it's always a bad. Oh, if the air is filled with smoke, go ahead and hold your breath.
If you have to go outside,
Yes, by all means. But do schedule a resumption of breathing for yourself sometime in the near future. And all right, so this will be the game. Next Tuesday, we'll check in and see if we found anything about what the DOJ can and can't do about what Wilbur Ross did and whether they have any intention of doing it. You'll still be on fire, I believe, but we'll have...
And I'll still be on fire. We'll still be talking about infrastructure.
Yeah.
We'll still be talking about Republican tricks.
Yeah. So, we'll look forward to more infrastructure weeks. No reason to change the calendar. We'll check in and see whether we've made any progress at that point.
All right.
Thanks again. Take care for the week. Yep. You do the same.
From
I will
networksradio.com.
follow you. Then we'll do the same.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Yeah, I was expecting a different comment at that point. All right, well, what's next? We know what's next. The West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Justice Putnam, maybe he's holding his breath when he's outside, too. What's he got on tap? Well, I don't know. I see Donald Trump's name up at the top, so it must be really, really good and smart. Stay tuned. I'm sure it's genius.